do you think the government of India will release?
How do you go about in solving this?
Did you receive any feedback from somebody?
A big leap from the normal thing that happens in
Yes.
On the environmental science curriculum for
Tshogpa, and welcome to BBS. I'm Sonam Rinchen. The issues of legality on the Fiscal Incentives Bill 2017 have continued to be a bone of contention between the government and the Druk Nyamrup Tshogpa. The Druk Nyamrup Tshogpa is accusing government of violating the constitution by imposing Fiscal Incentives Bill without passing through the parliament. But the government says that there is no question of legality issue and the government have not violated the constitution. To discuss more on this issue surrounding Fiscal Incentives Bill 2017, I am joined by the President of Druk Nyamrup Tshogpa, Dr. Tandi Dorji. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us on this program. Doctor, to begin with, DNT issued 2 press releases within this month. What was the reason behind?
Thank you very much, Sonam. Firstly, I would like to take this opportunity to wish Kuzazambo and good evening to all the viewers of 20 districts and 205 GWOX. And I also like to thank BBS for giving us this opportunity to clarify on our press releases that we have released recently. What is very important at the outset is to really talk about this issue from the importance that it is. We are talking about democracy, a gift that has been given to us by our kings. And most importantly, it forms the foundation and the very basis of our democracy. And that is the Constitution of Bhutan. If the Constitution is breached, as it has been done by the present government, then this matter is of serious nature, Sishunila. Yeah. And more importantly, I think what is very important to say from the outset is this is not about us or PDP or us versus the Prime Minister. Yeah. For that matter, between the NC and NA or between opposition and government. I think what is important is that it is in the interest of the country and for defending and safeguarding our constitution. So the press releases that we have sent out in the last few weeks is our concern after seeing the deliberations in the parliament and of the incentive policy of 2016 that was passed recently by the parliament. We are seriously concerned because this is a serious breach of the Constitution, Article 14.1, which says that taxes, fees and other forms of levies shall not be imposed or altered except by law. And therefore, the incentive policy, which is a term used, but if you dissect it, the question is all about taxation. Yes. It's about tax waivers and granting of tax holidays. Anything related to taxes should be deliberated by the parliament and passed by the parliament. That is absolutely and crystal clear from the Constitution, from the verdict of the Supreme Court decision, as well as the Public Finance Act of 2012. Yes. All other arguments which the Honourable Prime Minister has mentioned in his justifications, such as the Supreme Court verdict, etc., is misleading the people. Because in the court's findings, it says that they can grant, declare and grant. But the very next sentence mentions that, however, the exercise of the power to alter the rate of taxes by the government alone under the implied authority is not given by the Constitution. And this quote is from the findings of the court during the discussions that took place in the court. In the verdict itself, absolutely crystal clear, in 6.6 of the verdict, under no circumstances the authority to impose or alter taxes may be delegated to the executive. This is the verdict, the decision of the Supreme Court. Yes. So Article 14.1, the verdict of the Supreme Court and the Public Finance Act amendment of 2012 clearly says that taxes can only be, I will quote section 46.A of the Public Finance Act amendment 2012, which says imposition or increase of any tax or abolition, reduction or remission of any existing tax is the sole authority of the parliament. Therefore, it is absolutely clear. All the other acts that were used as a justification, such as the Sales Tax and Customs and Excise Act of 2000, the Public Finance Act of 2007, are null and void because an act that has been passed later supersedes and eclipses all the other acts that have been passed prior to it. Therefore, the argument that such and such articles in those acts were not amended is not correct. And therefore, being a legislature, I would have thought that Honorable Prime Minister would know these much better than me.
Yes.
And we, as I said, this is our interpretation.
Yes.
Interpretations may differ,
Yes.
definitely may differ. But the fact is, in this particular case, the National Council, the opposition, and Druk Nyamrup Tshogpa, we have said the same thing, that this is a clear violation. Therefore, I would have thought and we would have wished that the government would consider and have a relook. The fact that they have accepted as a bill in 2016 in May 8th itself is an indication that they know that it is an onus of the parliament itself. So therefore, we continue to stand firm in our belief that this is a serious violation of the Constitution.
Thank you, Doctor. Article 14.1 of the Constitution, like you mentioned, states that taxes, fees and other forms of levies shall not be imposed or altered
Correct.
except by law. But it's my interpretation. Don't you think it is time-bound tax holiday? It is neither alter nor imposing taxes on it.
As I said, Mola, there is no time bound as such. What the Constitution states and our interpretation and our view is that anything related to tax, an incentive, as I mentioned,
Yes.
is a tax holiday, tax waiver.
Yes.
That decision is only that can be taken by the Parliament.
Yes.
And that has been absolutely and crystal clear from existing provisions of the law. Therefore, as I mentioned, we are quite amazed at the justifications that have been given by the government.
Yes.
We would think when three bodies are questioning it, there must be some basis. And therefore, to have a look and not to be arrogant, not to be angered by this, because there is no winner in this.
Yes.
There is no winner or loser in this. We are talking about the Constitution and for the future of the country.
Yes. The Prime Minister during recent Meet the Press challenged the opposition and DNT to take the government to court over the issues of granting fiscal incentives.
Yes.
Are you trying to drag government to court?
The question of whether it will have to go to court or not, as I mentioned, if necessary, Druk Nyamrup Tshogpa will seek the legal, we will seek legal recourse. However, it all depends on how the government takes this. As I mentioned, it is not Druk Nyamrup Tshogpa alone, but the opposition as well as the National Council. Therefore, we would think that they would reconsider and look at these issues. However, this is not like any other case where there is a loser and winner, as I mentioned.
Yes.
This is talking about the Constitution. It has to go to its logical conclusion. Now, whether it goes to court or not, it all depends on how the government responds.
Yes.
From whatever we have seen so far, it looks like they are not agreeing or not accepting
Yes.
the errors that they have made. Therefore, as I mentioned, Druk Nyamrup Tshogpa will definitely take it to its logical conclusion.
Yes.
And we are in discussions with our legal experts and with the advice, and through careful review of all existing provisions, we will take it to its logical conclusion.
Yes. How about the Druk Nyamrup Tshogpa saying that the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister will have to resign on moral ground, violating Constitution? Are you still sticking on that?
As I mentioned, I think if the Constitution has been violated and it is found that indeed the Constitution has been breached, I think stepping down and resignation is a good option. Because today we see people who are jailed and imprisoned for 2 packets of baba. That is for breaching small criminal acts of the penal code. We are talking about a constitution. So therefore, I would think that if it is indeed found that it is breached and has been violated, I think stepping down and resignation is a good option. And we are sticking to it. As seen in many other countries, the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister should take accountability, as I said, if it is found that it has been breached and violated. Therefore, this is seen in many other countries. People take moral responsibility and step down. I think there is no need to be angered, arrogant, as I mentioned earlier. This is not about personal attack or anything. It is simply question of whether the constitution has been breached or not.
Now, as the president of the Druk Nyamrup Tshogpa, do you think that the intent of intensive incentives, fiscal incentives, is irrational when tax exemptions are given to most lucrative businesses? Don't you think fiscal incentives favors only those big established houses?
That is why we are questioning this particular fiscal incentive policy. Because of the past episodes, and the Prime Minister himself has mentioned that the fiscal incentives of 2013 were passed 2-3 days prior to the previous government resigning. Similarly, this present government also has passed the incentive policy 1 year before the elections. As you mentioned also, as the Prime Minister mentioned, the beneficiaries of such incentives are usually the powerful and the wealthy. The tax waivers are for that. We understand that there are some economic benefits as well, but the beneficiaries are largely rich and powerful people. But besides that, tax waiver in any form is a political motive. If incentives were actually to be given, why not in the first year of government? Why at the fag end of the tenure? Therefore, we are questioning the same thing. While we are being accused of releasing these press releases as a political motive, we are questioning the granting of tax incentives and their timing of the granting. Similarly, I think if you have to mention many other what the previous government as well as the present government has done, sometimes many of those seem like it is done for political motive rather than in the larger national interest of the country. That, however, is another debate altogether.
DNT says that the PM will be remembered as a double standard politician. Your comment on this?
It's not intended to attack him personally.
Yes.
But what we intended to say was that the Honourable Prime Minister, as the opposition leader, took the previous government to court on this same issue, not the same fiscal incentive, but on the tax issue. Therefore, at that time, there were only 2 members of the opposition. Therefore, he, more than anybody, knows absolutely very clearly about the issue at hand. And what he has quoted is the findings of the court, which is not legally binding. The decisions of the Supreme Court clearly says that under no circumstances the authority to impose all the taxes may be delegated to the executive. Similarly, the amendments made in the Public Finance Act clearly mentions that taxation is the authority of the Parliament. Therefore, a person who has taken the previous government to court on the same matter and now violating the same clause, this we think is double standard. And so we are questioning the motive behind it. If it benefits, then he is going to take to court. If it doesn't benefit, then he is going to keep it quiet and push it under the carpet. But for Druk Nyamrup Tshogpa, as I mentioned, it is not about the Honourable Prime Minister or against the PDP government, but it is about safeguarding and protecting our constitution. For us, that is prime, and that is our only concern of today. If we can clarify and clearly make these tax or incentive policies in the future to be passed only by the Parliament, it will be in the best interest of the country. Otherwise, as you mentioned, future governments can use this for their own benefit or to their supporters. Other thing I want to clarify is that 2017 fiscal policy has been accepted as act because of the action of the Speaker. It was not because of the PDP government. They actually wanted to put it in Parliament as information, but the Speaker took it up as a bill. But the question still remains, will future speakers accept that this fiscal policy should be taken up as a bill? The question is, that question should not remain. The question is, should all taxes, irrespective of whether it's imposition, granting, reducing, abolishing, should be the authority of only the Parliament or not? And we think that as per Constitution Article 14.1, that authority lies only with the Parliament. And that is how it was intended, and it should be.
But the Constitution clearly states that the Speaker has the authority to determine as a money bill or not.
Yes.
Don't you
Yes,
think?
I agree. That's why the Speaker, in using his authority, has accepted this bill. But my question is, will future governments and the future speakers accept it as a bill or not? Because if he, and with the present government saying that it is still the government's prerogative, and if the future speaker feels that it is also his prerogative not to accept it as a bill, we will never get this sorted out. Therefore, all we are asking is, let us sort this out. PDP by its action, or the speaker's action, has accepted that fiscal incentive policy is a bill. Therefore, let's change let's accept what is in the Constitution and the Public Finance Act, and agree that all fiscal incentive policies now and for future should be the authority of the Parliament. But the government's persistent denial that it is still the government's prerogative leaves a very dangerous risk for future governments and future speakers to take on their own interest.
The National Council feels that the government should collect taxes that were foregone without Parliament's approval. That's with regard to fiscal incentives bill, which was passed on 8th May. So, do you think that it is necessary to collect those who received the...
Yes, I think what is the first and foremost important thing is whether taxes, whether the violation of the Constitution has been breached or not. Once that is clear, if it is breached, it means that the tax waivers have to be collected. However, here it is not the people who are at fault, it is the government's fault, and that's why we are placing this accountability on the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister. However, since it is not the people's fault of having not paid their taxes, we think there are many ways by which the government could still solve this issue. And one of the ways is by passing they can pass another act and that can bail out those who have not paid these taxes. I'm sure there are many other ways. However, the most important thing is if there is a breach, then the tax that has been waived has to be collected. That is the law. But we are repeatedly saying that it is not the people's fault. We are giving this accountability to the government, especially the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister, and therefore they must take moral responsibility. But there are ways by which we can solve the second issue, that is whether to collect the waivers or not.
Yes. Now, talking about the collecting back the incentives. Now, what will happen to those who have fiscal incentives in 2010? What about fiscal incentives granted in 2013?
Now, from our understanding of the legal provisions, since the Public Finance Act was amended in 2012, we think that this supersedes the 2010. Therefore, it may not apply. However, as I mentioned, the first and foremost is to see whether it has been breached or not. Once it is concluded that it has been breached, then any breach, whether it has been done in the past or in the present, will be considered a breach. And therefore, only thing we are questioning is that the Constitution has been breached. It is not in line with the decisions of the Supreme Court verdict as well as the Public Finance Act of 2012. Therefore, as I mentioned earlier, quoting acts which were passed prior to them and which is contradicting to the Public Finance Act of 2012 is null and void. And this is known that the older laws will not be in effect once a new law supersedes it. So therefore, today I think we should only consider ourselves with the Constitution, Article 14.2, the verdict of the Constitution, verdict of the Supreme Court, and the Public Finance Act of 2012. All others are irrelevant. Similarly, our Honourable Prime Minister mentioned the Customs Act of 2017. No act can be applied retrospectively.
Yes.
It is applied only from the day that it is tabled in Parliament. Therefore, quoting this is nothing but misleading the public. So as I mentioned, I think what is important is to accept the facts as it is. Crystal clear. The Constitution is absolutely clear. The verdict of the Supreme Court is absolutely clear. The Public Finance Act, Section 46.A is absolutely clear. And we don't see it any other way.
Some observers say that the fiscal incentives policy will only widen the gap between rich and poor. Your comment on this?
On that, we think that there are benefits for the wider section of the society and on the for the economy of the country. But it should be done with good intent. The timings of these tax incentives should be done appropriately in discussion, and it should definitely benefit every section of the society. However, as we see over the last few years, many of these incentives have benefited only the top class people. Therefore, we are yet to see more such incentives provided for the people at the middle and the lower rung.
Yeah. The members of the National Council, that's a general one, were not very happy with the National Assembly because they did not deliberate on the recommendations submitted by the National Council. So in your view, do you think for the larger interest of the nation, do you think it was important for the National Assembly especially to deliberate on the fiscal incentives recommendations submitted by the National Council?
Plus, although this is not very relevant to Druk Nyamrup Tshogpa because we are a political party and the NC and the NA functions within their own mandates. However, looking at the legal provisions that we see, the National Council is allowed to deliberate, but the National Assembly may or may not take the recommendations of the National Council. However, in the interest of democracy, we think that it is absolutely important to discuss and deliberate. This is healthy democracy, where we hear other people's opinions and interpretations, give them ear, and then you make a informed decision. Therefore, I think in the interest of democracy, that we talk about strengthening democracy, I think it is a very healthy thing to deliberate and discuss and hear each other's opinion. However, as I mentioned, the National Assembly has its mandate and they are not bound to listen to, especially when it comes to money bills, on the recommendations of the National Council. But as I mentioned, it's good and healthy democracy to deliberate and discuss.
Yes. Doctor, your final word on the fiscal incentives. I have no question on that. If you have left.
No, thank you very much. But all I want to say at the end of this discussion is that this is nothing personal. It is not about me or the Prime Minister or between Nyamrup Tshogpa and DPT or for that matter NCNA, as I mentioned. We are all talking about the interest of the country and the Constitution. The fact remains that the Constitution has been breached by giving tax waivers and tax holidays, which is in direct contradiction to Article 14.2 of the Constitution, as well as the decision of the Supreme Court and Public Finance Act. That is absolutely clear. Therefore, all we are saying is let us safeguard the Constitution. That is the basic foundation of our democracy and a precious gift that has been passed down from our kings. I think we owe it to all future Bhutanese to set the right examples and precedents so that these things do not occur again and again in the future. I think it is in the best interest of our happiness, harmony, and to have a law that we can all have faith in, and that we can all live happily together. So therefore, I want to say that this is nothing personal, but we have to come to a conclusion on this constitution breach that we have repeatedly said that PDP has done. And when three bodies have said the same thing, I think it is in everybody's interest that the government should give a patient hearing and relook at these provisions that we are repeatedly saying. So therefore, we hope that these things will be sorted out in a very harmonious way, and we would like to also come to a conclusion with this, but we are determined that we will take it to its logical conclusion.
Yeah. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us on this
Thank you
program
very
and
much.
sharing your views on fiscal incentives policy. Doctor,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching the program.
So do you think the government of India will release?
How do you go about in solving this?
Did you receive any feedback from somebody?
A big leap from the normal thing that happens in
On the environmental science curriculum for